A Great Argead Saga ALEXEIN, Alexander the Great. Volume 1, Telesias, The War Dance. By Macaulay. Episode 55-1, Eastward Bound Part 1. Mid-October, foothills of Mount Olympus. The journey from the sanctuary of Pella was no longer a fresh wound, but a grinding erosion of the soul. Deep into the second week of the march, the boys had long since moved past the initial hysterical grief of departure. The convulsive sobs of their first days had been replaced by a hardened, hollow silence. They had been forced to mature in the shadow of the Theban column, their weeping silenced by the crushing weight of their new reality. Having left the familiar Macedonian heartland far behind, they had crossed into the vast sun-bleached expanse of the Thessalian plains, where the phantom scent of the northern harvest had been obliterated by the metallic tang of shifting earth and the stale sweat of a column that had forgotten the taste of rest. For these boys, the experience was a jarring revelation. Never before had they ventured this far from the palace at Pella. Their world had been confined to the court and the nearby hunting grounds. Now they were spectators to an unfolding spectacle, a relentless migration through a reality that felt both endless and unforgiving. As they traversed these alien landscapes, witnessing strange dialects, unfamiliar customs, and cultural behaviors that defied their provincial logic, it struck them with the force of a physical blow. They had been living in a box. Their perspective, once narrowly defined by the tribal borders of Macedon, was rapidly expanding. The pace was relentless, a rhythm designed to minimize vulnerability. Given that an ancient army marching with a heavy baggage train typically covered roughly 15 to 20 kilometers, 9 to 12 miles per day, they had traversed approximately 200 to 250 kilometers, 125 to 155 miles since leaving Pella. They were now rapidly approaching the foothills of Mount Olympus. Looking ahead, the looming, snow-capped mass, the boundary between the lowlands and the southern passes, manifested as a tangible physical obstacle. At their current, unyielding pace, they would reach the base of the foothills within 2, perhaps 3, days of hard marching, covering another 30 to 60 kilometers, 20 to 35 miles before the flat plains surrendered to the rugged ascent. Through these rising foothills, sparse with ancient oak and dark pine, the Theban army moved as a single, disciplined, multi-limbed behemoth. Philip had long since stopped merely observing their bronze cuirasses and oil-rubbed leather. He was now dissecting them with the cold, clinical focus of an apprentice architect of war. Having already mastered the cadence of their march, the subtle hand signals of their officers, and the geometric precision of their camp setup. Riding knee to knee, Peithon and Leonnatus clutched their reins, their faces masks of calculated resentment. "They don't even look back at what they've taken," Peithon muttered, his voice stripped of the tremor of fear, replaced now by the hard edge of political cynicism. "We are nothing to them, just cargo, collateral in their southern games. They don't even think to acknowledge the kingdom they've gutted." "Let them look where they want," Leonnatus countered, his jaw tight. He adjusted his grip on the leather, his eyes gleaming with a reckless Highlander bravado that had only sharpened over the miles. "I don't need them to look at us. A cage only holds a beast until it grows teeth. I have memorized the weight of their iron, and when we finally ride back north, I'll drive a mountain spear right through their polished plates." Beside them, Amyntor sat with a steady, unyielding posture that served as a grounding anchor. This is the threshold, he thought, his devotion to the prince and the future empire hardening like cooling steel. We are no longer children playing with wooden swords in the courtyards. We are the shield. If the South intended to forge them into hostages, he would ensure his frame became the hardest iron in the furnace for the prince, and for the empire, they would one day build from these ruins. Little did the silent boy realize that this unyielding fidelity would echo across generations, destined to be inherited by his unborn son, Hephaestion, who would become the absolute heartbeat unfiercest general of Alexander the Great. "Let them treat us like boys," he mused, his gaze flickering briefly toward Philip's back, searching for a tremor, a weakness, anything that would allow him to step in and offer the strength he had bottled up since Pella. They do not see the fire behind his eyes, nor the way he maps their weaknesses while they sleep. They think they are leading captives to a classroom. They are actually sharpening the blades that will eventually dismantle their own hegemony. And I will be the one to ensure that no matter how deep the rot of this captivity goes, his resolve remains untarnished. If it costs me my soul to hold this line, then it is a price I have already paid. The boys watched the horizon with growing, quiet intensity, sensing that the plains were merely the prelude. With the breathtaking scenery before them, each turn revealing new vistas of distant mountains, the glint of the sea, and the fortified silhouettes of hidden city-states, the narrow views of their youth were being shattered. "Look at the way the road bends toward the coast," Antigonus whispered, his single eye wide as he took in the sheer expanse of the Thessalian landscape. "It's not just hills and mud, is it? It's a network. Everything connects." Philip kept his gaze locked on the southern horizon, his voice calm yet heavy with implication. "It is a machine of power, Antigonus. Cities, ports, mountain passes, they aren't just scenery. They are the gears that turn the world. They think we are staring because we are lost," Philip thought, observing the way a distant walled city caught the afternoon light. "They have no idea that I am already calculating the distance between that wall and the next. I'm not looking at the land. I'm looking at a map of what I will one day command." In their place, a grand pan-Hellenic consciousness was taking root. They realized that the world was not just a collection of neighbors to be fought, but a stage of endless possibilities. A far grander ambition began to crystallize within them, stretching beyond the horizon toward a destiny that would eventually demand the conquest of everything that lay before them. "I used to think Pella was the center of the earth," Peithon muttered, his voice barely audible over the rhythmic tramping of the Theban line. "Now, looking at this, Pella feels like a small room. I've finally stepped out of a small room," Leonnatus echoed in his mind, his grip tightening on his reins. "And I have been clawing at the walls of that room my entire life, thinking it was the whole world. I don't want to go back to the room. I want to build a house that covers the entire map." As the column began its final, grueling approach, the road tightened and the gradients sharpened. The true, rugged threshold into the heart of Greece and the looming shadow of their destination had begun in earnest. "Let the pass be steep," Philip resolved, his pulse steadying as the first shadows of the foothills stretched long and jagged across their path. "Let the mountain be high. The higher the obstacle, the greater the view from the summit." Did they bring all of this from the south? 1,000 carriages or more? A voice, raw with exhaustion and weighted with a child's wide-eyed awe, broke through Philip's intense focus. It was 12-year-old Antigonus, his face smudged with travel dust and his lips cracked from the biting wind. He sat slumped on his pony, his joints aching from the relentless trot, watching a massive cart laden with an endless supply of grain bags and seasoned barrels of olive oil grown past. "Not all of it, young master," a quiet, dry voice remarked from the shadow of the baggage line. Philip turned his head slightly to see Eumenes, the wiry, sharp-eyed youth who had been extracted from the royal administrative staff of Pella to manage the prince's records. Though Eumenes' fingers were more accustomed to the cold stain of vinegar ink and the smooth textures of premium Egyptian papyrus than the bronze pommel of a broadsword, his mind was a relentless machine of microscopic observation. "They send out small, hyper-disciplined outrunner groups each day to the local settlements," Eumenes explained, leaning his lean frame closer to Philip's stirrup, his eyes scanning the perimeter lines with clinical precision. "They shop for fresh forage and barley, paying the village elders in crisp, heavy Boeotian silver. The locals take the coin, but their hands tremble. It is a masterclass in soft power and unyielding logistics, my prince. The message is silent, yet absolute. We possess the martial muscle to extract your entire harvest by force, yet we choose to purchase your obedience." Philip etched the calculation directly into his bone. He looked at the vast, flat expanses of the camp and did not see a temporary resting place. He saw a laboratory. Later that night, under a darkening purple firmament, the heavy, rich aroma of roasted mutton and leek stew wafted through the camp lines. Philip sat near the central fire, watching the fatigue-clad soldiers eat with a quiet, muted efficiency. Around him, the other noble boys of the Macedonian vanguard huddled close to the heat, their youthful frames casting long, shivering shadows against the rough camp canvas. "Observe," Philip commanded himself, his eyes flicking from the rhythmic chewing of the veterans to the systematic cleaning of their gear. "They are not merely eating, they are refueling an engine. Every movement is a deliberate, wasted motion-free operation. If I can isolate the variable that keeps them from exhaustion, I can rewrite the stamina of my own men. Antigonus rubbed his throbbing, dust-encrusted eye, his small jaw working aggressively through a tough chunk of mutton. He spat a bit of gristle into the embers and leaned toward Philip. "They eat like they march," Antigonus muttered, his singular gray eye tracking a pair of silent Theban veterans across the flames. "No shouting. No spilled wine. It's unnatural, Philip. In Pella, our barons would be 3 flagons deep by now, boasting of hunts are threatening to cut each other's throats. These men, they chew like they're counting the movements. They aren't men, they're parts of a wall," Antigonus thought bitterly, his chest tightening as he remembered his father's estate fading into the northern mist. But a wall can be climbed. Let them ignore us. And mapping every face, every stride. One day, they'll look up from their neat little fires and see a Macedonian vanguard they can't buy off with silver. Beside him, Peithon let out a sharp, cynical breath, staring down into his wooden bowl. They count because they are afraid to drop their guard. Look at them. They treat this plain like a battleground because they know the moment they soften, the mountains will reclaim them. Peithon's fingers clamped hard around the rim of his bowl, his inner dialogue burning with a dark, resentful clarity. "My family traded me away to secure a border treaty, left me to rot in the south while my brothers inherit the highlands. If I am to be a hostage, I will be a toxic one. I'll absorb their discipline, strip their tactics bare, and use their own precious geometry to carve my way back to the north." "Let them be precise," Leonnatus whispered, his eyes gleaming with a reckless Highlander fire as he adjusted his heavy woolen mantle. He nudged Peithon's shoulder, a fierce, sub-verbal bravado vibrating through his frame. "The sharper they are, the better the prize when we take it from them. I don't care about their quiet numbers. Their bronze looks thick, but it pierces just like ours when you find the joint. They think we're children," Leonnatus thought, his pulse racing with an intoxicating, volatile defiance. "They think because we aren't wearing 40 pounds of Boeotian oak, we don't have the stomach for blood. Let them think it. The longer they treat us like baggage, the closer we get to their throats." Riding a silent current beneath their frantic whispers, Amyntor sat perfectly erect, his unyielding posture serving as a quiet, grounding anchor. He did not speak. His eyes remained fixed on Philip, tracking the prince's breathing, matching his stillness. "We are the blueprint," Amyntor conceptualized, his devotion hardening into an absolute, unshakable bedrock. "Philip does not weep for the palace we left behind, so neither will I. If the South is a forge, then we are the steel being hammered together. I will watch his back on this road, in their academies, and on whatever field the future demands. We will return as a machine. He is the blade, and I am the scabbard," Amyntor added to himself, the weight of the pledge settling deep into his marrow. He looks at the fire and calculates the caloric necessity of the infantry. I look at the fire and calculate the distance I must throw myself to protect him. They think this is a march of education. They have no idea they are training their own executioners. Little did the silent boy compute that this absolute generational fidelity would one day manifest in his unborn son Hephaestion, who would become the absolute heartbeat unfiercest general of Alexander the Great. Once the meal was finalized, the perimeter was secured with an architecture that left 0 blind spots for a provincial ambush. Through the gloom, Philip noticed a detail that caused his brow to furrow. A squad of soldiers systematically digging a series of deep, uniform trenches at a strict coordinate away from the tents. They do not merely occupy the earth, they dominate its very biology, Philip mused, watching the rhythm of the shovels. In Pella, we left our filth for the rains to wash into the wells, a casual neglect that cost us hundreds to fever every campaign season. These Thebans, they see the rot before it manifests. They treat the land not as a stage for glory, but as a battlefield of variables. Catching the prince's inquisitive gaze, Eumenes whispered into the chill air. "They are digging latrines, Philip. Strictly downwind and mathematically isolated from the river source. Tomorrow, before the vanguard lifts a single shield, they will be covered with quicklime and soil to suppress the invisible rot. These Thebans do not leave a single fluid ounce of reality to chance. They fight the disease in the camp as fiercely as they fight the steel on the plain." Lying within the dark, suffocating interior of his leather tent that night, Philip rested his head upon his cedar chest, his hand instinctively reaching into the interior seam of his traveling cloak to feel the cold, reassuring weight of the curved Thracian Saga his mother had hidden there. Sanitation is a weapon, he thought, the sharp blade feeling like a secret promise against his palm. To keep an army clean is to keep it loyal. A soldier who is not wasting away from his own waste is a soldier who remains a cog in the machine. Outside, the unfamiliar, calculated sounds of the imperial machine stagnated heavily in his ears. The gentle rustle of pine leaves, the sharp alternating passwords of the sentries tracking through the dark, and the steady, reassuring crackle of the watchfires. It was a watchful, uneasy quiet, worlds away from the boisterous, drunken, and treacherous comfort of Pella. The silence here is not peace. It is vigilance, Philip realized, closing his eyes as he synchronized his breathing to the cadence of the sentry's footsteps. In Pella, the noise was a mask for our lack of order. Here, the silence is the sound of the order itself. They are teaching me that the difference between a king and a corpse is not the crown, but the precision with which he organizes his own survival. In the dark chambers of his intellect, his mother's final conspiratorial whisper echoed with a terrifying, rhythmic serenity. Only the man who navigates a house under the posture of a guest, while systematically dissecting its structural parameters, retains the capacity to one day turn inward and reduce that architecture to absolute ash. She knew, Philip realized, the memory of her gaze, sharp as a hunting hawk cutting through the cold. She didn't weep when they took me because she knew I wasn't being taken. I was being sent to a forge. And she knew I was the only one in that palace with a constitution to endure the heat. "Are you awake, Philip?" A soft, hesitant voice drifted from the neighboring cot. It was Leonnatus, his tone betraying a rare flicker of doubt. Do you think we'll ever truly see Pella again?" Philip kept his eyes shut, his voice a steady, chilling anchor in the dark. "Don't ask about Pella, Leonnatus. Ask if we are learning enough to ensure that when we do return, it is on our own terms. The moment you worry about the home you left, you lose the house you are currently in. We are not guests, we are engineers. And you cannot rebuild an empire if you are still mourning the ruins of the last one." "I understand," Leonnatus whispered back, his breath hitching, but his resolve hardening. "I'll watch the perimeter. I'll keep the count." "Good," Philip murmured. "Keep your eyes on their iron, not our memory." Philip closed his gray eyes, his breathing slowing into a perfect, chilling synchronization with the camp. The Thebans believed they were dragging home a docile northern lamb to guarantee their peace. They had zero parameters of foresight. They measure the weight of my chains, Philip thought, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips as he envisioned the 7 gates of Thebes. But they have no way to measure the velocity of a mind that has already escaped. They think I'm a student of their glory. I'm a student of their collapse. They did not understand that by dragging him down this long road, they were providing the wolf with the keys to their own armory. He would watch. He would listen. He would systematically master every link of their chain until the blueprints of Greece belonged exclusively to the house of the Argeads. One day, Pelopidas, Philip promised the silence, you will look at the map of your own city and realize the ink is no longer yours. As the column crawled away from the serrated embrace of Olympus, the rugged, broken cliffs of Macedonia dissolved into the shimmering, soul-crushing expanse of the Thessalian plains. High above, clinging to a desolate ridge like a carrion crow, the shadow of Alexander Ferry watched. He sat motionless, his scouts crouched behind him in the dirt, their presence a cold, silent infection on the landscape. Below, Pelopidas's long, rhythmic column stretched out, a ceaseless, pulsating ribbon of bronze and leather. From this height, the Theban soldiers and their precious cargo were stripped of their humanity, reduced to a line of tiny, frantic ants in a vast, uncaring machine, marching toward a nest they would never truly claim. Look at them, Alexander thought, his heart drumming a slow, sadistic rhythm. They strut through my domain as if they are conquerors, but they are just farmers of flesh, herding their little princes back to the slaughterhouse. They think the shield of Thebes makes them untouchable. They have no idea how easily a wall crumbles when the foundation is rotten with fear. A scout, his eyes narrowed against the biting wind, leaned in close, his voice a jagged whisper. Master Alexander, are we merely to sit here like statues while they march? I know the sacred band is down there, To engage them head-on is madness, a suicide. But to let them pass without a single lash of the whip? It tastes of weakness. Alexander's lips curled, the expression less a smile than the baring of a predator's teeth, cynical, hollow, and profoundly evil. Weakness? He mused, the thought dark and intoxicating. They have no idea what it is to be hunted. They are playing a game of politics, while I'm playing a game of attrition. Patience, Alexander rasped, his voice smooth as polished bone. We watch from the dark for now. This is my land, it breathes for me, and it blinds for me. When they sleep, when their guard is thinned by the frost, we shall drift into their column like smoke. We need not strike with a sword to break them. We will slip into their ranks, silent and nameless. 10 men vanish in the night, a throat slit in the dark, a whisper of terror that spreads through the lines. They will never know if it was a god, a ghost, or one of their own. I want to see the moment they realize they are no longer in control. Alexander savored the anticipation, the phantom sensation of a blade sliding between ribs. I want to see the great Pelopidas stare into the dark and see nothing but his own impotence. His men's faces shifted, the grim tension replaced by a hungry, jagged excitement. Yes, master. They will be walking into their own nightmares. Indeed, Alexander breathed, his gaze fixed on the unsuspecting line below. They are so terrified of losing their hostages that they have become prisoners themselves. Let them feel the weight of our eyes. Even if they sense us, they cannot turn. They are shackled to their precious prize, those royal hostages. Pelopidas will not risk a single hair on a prince's head to hunt us. We shall haunt their flanks, turning their glorious march into a procession of paranoia. Let us see how the Theban saviors endure a war fought with whispers and shadows. The wind sweeping down from the jagged peaks of the Illyrian ridge carried the sharp scent of wood smoke and impending rain. Below them, stretched across the fertile, mist-shrouded green valleys of Epirus, lay a sprawling patchwork of pastoral wealth. Unwalled settlements, fat grazing herds, and vulnerable mountain passes ripe for the taking. King Bartolus stood motionless at the very edge of the precipice, leaning heavily upon his iron-shod spear. At 80 years old, his frame was bent and scarred by 6 decades of perpetual war, yet his eyes remained as cold and sharp as the flint points of his arrows. He stared down at the Molossian heartland, with the predatory patience of a wolf that had watched empires rise and crumble in these frontier hills. They grow fat down there in the southern mists, Bartolus thought, his weathered jaw tightening as he surveyed the distant, peaceful grazing grounds. They build their stone temples and whisper of civilization, forgetting that the earth belongs to those who possess the strength to tear it from the soil. His gaze drifted slightly to the left, toward the narrow mountain throat, where, decades ago in 385 BC, the world had nearly broken them. I remember the golden bribes of Syracuse, Bartolus reflected bitterly. The memory of Dionysius's emissaries and the gleaming shipments of 2,000 mercenaries and 500 sets of hoplite armor flashing through his mind. They brought their southern geometry and bronze panoplies to our crags, thinking they could use the house of Bartolus as a blunt instrument. We tore through these very valleys then, 15,000 Molossian dead choked these rivers, and Alcidas crawled back to a throne built over a mass grave. But when Spartan iron under Agesilaus marched north, we learned that a king cannot merely ravage a land, he must anchor it. Beside him stood his son, Cleitus, mid-40, and built like a battering ram. Cleitus's broad hands gripped the hilt of his broadsword, his chest heaving with the restless anticipation of a veteran commander eager for blood. The scouts report the mountain levies are scattered, Father, Cleitus muttered, his voice a deep, gravelly rumble that barely carried over the mountain wind. The Epirotes rely too much on their treaties with the south. They think the ridges protect them. A single coordinated push before the autumn rains, and the entire northern valley will collapse into our hands, just like the old days. Bartolus did not answer immediately. He let the silence stretch, his gaze shifting slightly to his right, where his daughter, mid-teen Audata, stood watching the valley with an intensity that unnerved even the hardened warriors of the royal guard. Audata sat astride her unbridled mountain pony, her fingers tracing the carved bone handle of a hunting dagger tucked into her belt. She didn't look at the pastoral beauty of the lowlands. She studied the strategic bottlenecks, the choke points where cattle trails narrowed between limestone cliffs, and where an invading force could easily trap retreating herds. My father and brother see pasture, Argead thought, her young eyes narrowing analytically. I see a cage. If we strike too deep without securing the high passes behind us, the Molossians will bottle us up in their ravines like game in a pit, just as the Spartans cornered us when we lacked strategic depth. You are silent, girl, Bartolus rasped, his voice cutting through the wind as he glanced sideways at his daughter. Does the sight of a Pyrrhus frighten you? Audita met her father's unblinking stare without a trace of hesitation. Frighten me? No, father. But I see no glory in repeating the slaughter of our past. If we take the valleys, we must hold them against the Spartans to the south and the Macedonians to the east. A raid brings cattle. The kingdom requires blood and an unyielding wall to set its foundations. Cletus snorted softly, a mixture of paternal amusement and dismissive pride. Listen to the girl. She talks of kingdoms while the blood still sings for a simple plunder. Further back along the ridge, late-teen Bartolus II, son of Cletus, stood leaning against a boulder, his arms crossed over a heavy breastplate of boiled leather. Unlike his Aunt Audita's calculating gaze, young Bartolus watched the horizon with the burning, impatient ambition of youth. He had heard the aging king's tales of past campaigns, how Illyria had carved its dominance across the western marches through sheer, unyielding violence, and he was desperate to prove his own name in the annals of war. Let them talk of strategy and supply lines, the young prince thought, his heart hammering against his ribs in a fierce, rhythmic pulse. I want the sound of bronze crashing against bronze. I want them to know that the house of Bartolus is iron from the crown down to the dirt. King Bartolus let out a low, gravelly chuckle that rattled deep within his aged chest. Your daughter speaks with the mind of a ruler, Cletus, and your blood burns hot, young Bartolus, the old king declared, his voice rising with sudden, commanding authority that silenced the ridge. Let them keep their laws and their southern gold. We are the storm that descends from the crags. Sound the war horns. To be continued in episode 55-2. Eastward Bound Part 2. A Great Argead Saga ALEXEIN. Volume 1, Telesias, the War Dance. A new episode every single day. We are dropping a new episode every day until the epic conclusion of Volume 1. Each chapter delivers a tight, hyper-focused 15 to 30-minute hit of cinematic historical drama, perfect for your daily plunge into antiquity. Watch the cinematic video trailer. Listen to the full saga now. Bookmark Volume 1, Telesias playlist. Join the vanguard. Subscribe to follow the rise of the Argead dynasty. Thumbs up to help push our vanguard through the algorithm's gauntlet. Comment below.